Welcome back to Light the Fuse, and this is the beginning of a little mini-series we got planned out. Charles, this was all really your concocted idea, so if people like it, they will shower you with praise, and if they don't, they will come at you with pitchforks. So do you want to tell people what this is?
Bring on the pitchforks. I'm ready.
Yeah,
I just, we wanted to take a little bit of a break, but we also didn't want to leave your feeds empty on every Friday. So we're doing these little mini episodes. This is a special breakdown of the cinematography of the Mission Impossible franchise. And I wanted to bring on a couple of very close friends of mine, Adrian Correia and Andy Rydzewski, who are both incredibly talented, amazing cinematographers who I've worked with. Adrian, you knew before I did. You introduced us back in high school. And so we've known Adrian for a very long time.
Yeah.
And Adrian shot my first movie right out of college. He shot Night Owls. He shot a TV show I worked on. So I've worked with him a bunch, and Andy I've worked with on a couple TV things as well. And but they are very accomplished on their own. Adrian shot the second season of Glow. He shot Rami, which is on Hulu. He shot I don't think he shot all of it, but he shot a good amount of The Flight Attendant, which is on HBO Max. He's got another Netflix show coming out soon called Florida Man, which sounds really awesome. They haven't released any trailer for it or anything yet, but he's working a lot. And Andy Rydzewski shot for Hulu Pen 15, which is an amazing show you should check out if you haven't seen it. It's really funny. And then he also shot Dollface Season 2, which just came out on Hulu. And so these guys are really talented, really amazing, really insightful. It was a fun conversation to have with them where they could just talk about the cinematography and try to keep it not too technical so that it's, still enjoyable listen for anybody, even people who are not, cinematography nerds.
Yeah, it's a really fun chat with people that we've known for a long time. So I think the mood is good on this one. The vibe is right.
Yeah.
For just a little hangout sesh.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully you learn a little bit too, and I don't know, you learn more about them. And if you haven't watched any of their projects, please check those out.
Yeah, but you should do your favorite part of the show.
I'm doing it right now.
Let's do it. Bring it on.
Okay, well, this episode is sponsored by Jeremy Dillon and his podcast, My Favorite Album. You and I were on there just recently, Charles, and we did our top 10 of the year, and we have not stopped hearing back from Jeremy, who's watched some of the movies that we talked about that he hadn't seen. He's adjusting his list at all times to do this new list, but I thought that was a fun one. You can also listen to that on our Patreon.
Yeah.
This episode is also brought to you by John B., who is just the best and who's been with us for a really long time, as well as Elvis Ripley. So we have to thank all of them for sponsoring the show and making Light the Fuse happen. So that's it. That's all I got, Charles.
Great.
So should we get into it and we'll be back afterwards?
Let's jump right in.
Okay.
All right, so welcome, Adrian and Andy. We're so happy to have you guys here to talk about the cinematography of the Mission Impossible movies.
Thank you for having me.
This is great.
Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah, well,
Here in double here.
do we want to you guys have done your research. You've watched the Mission movies, and we are so excited to hear what you guys have to say about these movies. And this is kind of a new thing that we're trying out. And we want to sort of break down the differences of these movies. And so is there one that we want to start with first? Do we want to start with Fallout and work backwards, or do we want to just kind of talk in general about... I see Adrian shaking his head.
No, I think you have to proceed chronologically.
Okay.
I agree. This is the cinematographer's way.
Exactly.
I'm happy to be overruled. So I guess So we want to start by talking about Stephen Burum's work for Brian De Palma's Mission Impossible. Then, I mean, what are things that strike you about when you rewatched this movie?
Adrian, why don't you start? We chatted a little bit about it the other day, and I liked your read on it.
Well, it's funny because it's like Burum did a kind of almost like a blog post for the ASC about what he does every time you turn on a light. There's 3 things you do, and basically that article kind of informs everything you see about his style of photography, and specifically Mission Impossible as well. So.
Well, what are the 3 things he does?
Well, it's like you can create a shadow you can actually, I can't remember the exact three of them because I read it a while ago, but it's basically, it kind of is a pure distillation of what he does photographically, which is like create background texture, keying a subject, and then like creating separation through and layers of contrast through the photography. And if you look at all of it from a cinematography standpoint, I mean, that's kind of all over the first Mission Impossible. It's like these really kind of like old school kind of textured lighting techniques. You know, it's like it's kind of like the old. A lot of his work kind of reminds me of that old John Alton, who's an older cinematographer. He used to do a lot of film noir. These old film noir aesthetics where like the brightest highlights would be in the back, and you create texture with contrast and light. And there's a lot of that of elements of that in the first film that kind of don't really kind of come back until you get into Ellsworth's work and Rogue Nation, in my opinion, which is like a lot of like heavy textured shadows, use of harder light, and just more sculpted, kind of like decidedly kind of lit subjects. And I watched it in the UHD format, the first one again, and it was amazing to see just how kind of lit and kind of textured the style of the photography is. And I don't know if it is about me getting so used to the modern way of cinematography, which is kind of reflected in Fallout, but Mission Impossible has this really kind of decided, likely lit, textured, and depth with light that a lot of the other films don't have. So,
Are you buying all your movies over again in 4K?
I'm buying the ones I really, really value.
Okay.
Like that are really, really important to me, I will. Like I bought like Jaws the other day. But it's funny because like the motion is rendered differently in UHD files as opposed to like HD files, and that changes my perception of how things look as well. That's a longer conversation about the nature of video mastering and whatnot. But yeah, but it was amazing to look at because that kind of like super saturated kind of color and that kind of really big highlights and shadows are kind of well suited for the UHD format. So Mission 1 from a UHD standpoint actually really looks remarkable. Like it actually really punctuates. But I always think, and I think Burum is an incredibly underrated cinematographer. You know, like he is extraordinarily gifted, and you kind of forget but just how important his lighting is to his storytelling, which a lot of people don't do anymore. They're more about lighting spaces and whatnot. Like, but the cinematography and the lighting specifically in Mission, especially it's all over Burum's work with De Palma, is a really important storytelling element. Just how textured and kind of like strong-willed a lot of the lighting is, and I love it because it's not really anything you kind of see anymore often.
Yeah, that's what strikes me about the first one is that it I think when we interviewed De Palma, he sort of talked about how people don't really like movies the same way as they used to. And it has that very old Hollywood. I think, Adrian, you and I talked a little bit offline before this, like a week or two ago, and we were talking about how the first Mission kind of almost feels like a 1940s Hitchcock movie or something. Like it looks like Foreign Correspondent or something.
Yeah.
Just the way the close-ups are lit and everything is so different from the rest of the series.
Yeah.
And from anything you see now these days.
I was also struck because, I think the noir element struck me the most, like how it had just been a long time since I saw that. And it's like, it's a film noir. It's an action film noir, and particularly with the lighting. But I was also struck, especially after rewatching all of them, is, it's got that De Palma thing of like the camera is moving from one place to another. They're moving from a wide to a close-up or a wide to a two-shot, or like shots end up kind of becoming the whole coverage or bigger chunks of the coverage. And as we get later, and so I was very fascinated by the movement in it. It was like precise, I guess, more precise, like old school craft.
Yeah.
Is there? Do you think? I mean, I did not watch the movies again recently to have this in mind. But speaking, you're talking about the coverage. I mean, is there less coverage in the De Palma Mission Impossible than the other movies? I mean, we're talking about coverage like the number of shots in a scene. It's like if there's a wide, a medium, and a close up of all the different characters, you end up with all these different sizes and shapes of shots. Or is it just one shot that takes you through the whole scene? Is the first one less coverage than the other ones, or about the same?
Well, I mean, certain things are just like dictated, like Kristen Scott Thomas not being in the first scene, obviously that's a reshoot. Like the edit dictates that part of the storytelling because you don't have that actor there to be able to kind of create this kind of mise-en-scène that kind of plays, But a lot of De Palma stuff, specifically with the way he's using cameras and zooms and like Andy said, like tracking from one kind of specific plot point or story point to another with camera. You know, camera's a really important storytelling tool that dictates to the edit with De Palma's movies, as opposed to something like Mission 3 or even Mission 2, where so much of the editing plays a huge part in terms of the pacing and even the structure of the storytelling. So De Palma's a decidedly old-fashioned kind of feeling movie in that way, but I really love that because I think it helps build the tension in a kind of in a more, it's like it's a very stylized way to build tension, but it's a completely different stylized tension than something the way like Mission 2 has this incredible romanticism to the photography. So,
well, it's, I think in terms of like the color of the it's a kind of cooler in De Palma's movie, right? It's sort of a bluer feel to the light. Is that right to say, or no? I mean, you guys would know more than me.
I mean, I found it to just be colorful, period. Like its blues are richer, like more saturated, but I'd honestly say that about most of the colors. 3 had more color than I remembered.
3's colors are like really, the saturation is like,
yeah,
gonzo. Some of those looks like when they get to Shanghai and stuff. It's just awesome.
There's more definitive like color separation too. I mean, it's not quite that Dean Cundy kind of like 1980s blue for night, but like when they're walking along the riverbank after the list is in the open, like there's so much of that blue backlighting is hitting that smoke and creating this almost like hazy blue kind of like cloud that really is like definitively blue. I mean, it's also kind of that old school 90s thing where like a lot of like night photography, like really blue night photography. I mean, I always think of Dean Cundy when I think of that, just because he used that blue so specifically in a really saturated way with a lot of his work with Carpenter. But Burum uses it really effectively here to me. But it's a definitive kind of like color contrast, whereas I think Mission 3 is just a really kind of like punchy, saturated kind of look, which kind of I always think of Daniel Pearl anyway when I think of that. So
Daniel Pearl is
Dan Mendel.
Oh,
Dan Mendel's photography from 3. Sorry.
Yes, yeah. And I think going back to coverage, you bringing up 2 and 3 now. I feel like 2 and 3 are probably the ones that have the most coverage because it's that more kind of John Woo and Tony Scott type style, and J.J. Abrams is really, I feel like, because Dan Mendel came from the Tony Scott school, so there's a lot of longer lens shots, a lot more cutting going on. So it seems like there's a lot more coverage in those ones. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I would say so, but I also think like what's notable and I think part of the fun of this whole franchise, which really I found like inspirational, is how you can feel time when I mean, if nothing else, just Tom Cruise's face. I mean, we're talking about decades and decades, and that the style of the editing changes, the style of the light, the style of the camera move. It really. Most of the time, these franchises are like, well, we want to be the same, and we'll bump it up a little bit, or more money, or whatever it is. But they really embrace fully different creative visual approaches, and it makes it feel alive, but also like you can feel the age on it, maybe even more. Like the first one is already a callback. You know, it's already kind of an old noir. But then on top of that, it was what, 2000 for the first one, or is that right?
96 is the first one. 2000 is MI2 is 2000.
Yeah. Which also, I mean, the second one also is incredibly aged. Actually, I want to say, because only the first one inspired me to write a joke. So I have a Mission Impossible 1
great
joke. I'm glad somebody's got some humor in this episode. Go ahead. Yep.
All
Wow.
right.
We're too serious for Drew.
Yeah, it's too serious.
I mean, listen, if people are riveted by the coverage talk, let me know. But okay, go ahead for your joke.
All right. Why is Mission Impossible only the first one? Why is the first one the only movie considered a foreign film?
Charles, you want to cover this one?
You got me. I don't know.
I actually thought somebody might guess the answer because of all the Dutch angles.
Oh, okay. That's a real bad joke. Great.
Yeah.
I love it, Andy.
I was so excited. I giggled myself to sleep that night. It's incredible.
They're not that many, though. In all
fully
fairness.
disagree. No, I fully disagree. When they would
There's
punch
so many in
on
close-up.
Yeah, exactly. Their close-ups will kick.
But there are a lot in 3 too.
There are. Yes,
JJ
there
does
are.
a lot of them in 3 as well.
There are. Yeah.
But they're longer lens ones.
Yeah. I mean, they love their long lenses in 3. Which again, though, I was so stricken by how you could see the time of these movies. 2 is the easiest one to point to, but like in the third one, it has that long lens, sort of faux handheld. Like, I mean, it's handheld, but nothing's happening that they're
not trying. Yeah, they're not trying to keep it steady.
No, they're trying specifically to add shake. Like they're just sitting there for some of their long close-ups, and they're like shaking the camera, which I've certainly done. But it's definitely of its time. Like you don't see that as often now. But that was hot for a little while,
right?
And you can see. And he was what? Enemy of the State was like 98 or something, and.
Yeah.
As soon as I realized he shot that, I was like, oh, yeah, you can see that.
I think that was the quote from JJ in particular. I think JJ hired Dan Mindel and told him, I want this to look like Enemy of the State, I think is what he said to him. I remember that might have been when we talked to Dan, or it might have been somewhere I read that, but I remember finding that somewhere. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's what it felt like to me. It felt like a late 90s style action approach. And then the lighting, as has already been mentioned, was like a little more hyper everything, like hyper color, and just splashes of like green on a back wall. Like it's not necessary. I mean, motivated by whatever, but not, it's there for color.
3 feels much bluer to me than 1.
I think 3 is bluer. I think 1 is a little bit more neutral with the skin tones. And then 2 is much more like warm. There's tons of warmth and openness in terms of the lighting on faces. There's not nearly as much contrast, but it also matches in terms of photographic tone. Like the second one is like super, it has this almost kind of the charade-like kind of like fun and tone to it that kind of like it tries to embrace this kind of lighter kind of spy feeling. Whereas the first one's really kind of hard-boiled, like a noir, and then they jump to this kind of less serious kind of tone for 2, and then 3 jumps right back into this kind of like more like just hard-boiled kind of grittier kind of aesthetic, but with like this super colorful Mindale edge. There's probably something influenced by Tony Scott, like those heavy greens and yellows and blues and whatnot. So I mean, as a color film, it's a really punchy thing, whereas I think the first one, in terms of light, kind of creates that punch and separation and that kind of feeling with the photography from the intensity and quality of light, as opposed to the third one, which I think she does a lot more with color. So, but that's also like tone. There's not so much of that outrageous color stuff in the second one. It's actually, with the exception of some of the flourishes with slow motion and stuff like that, it's a tamer film from a color standpoint. So.
And we're back. 1 chaotic episode down and 3 more to go. So hopefully you like it.
Yeah, I said just a couple follow-up notes just on this part. I just wanted to say that I found the Stephen Burum article that Adrian cites, and I'll put it in our show notes. It lists the 3 things that Stephen Burum mentioned you have to do when you light. The quick version is 1, the first thing is to cast a shadow. 2, the second thing you do in lighting is to create separation. And 3, the third and final thing you do in lighting is to add fill. And there's a bigger description on each of those 3 things in this article, and he goes on to elaborate even more. So I'll link that in the show notes for this episode.
You saying that makes me realize how few those 3 things are actually carried through on television and in movies today. It's all just flats, kind of diffuse. Yeah, anyway. Listen to Burum. Yeah.
And then, I think at one point Adrian mentioned Cundy and Carpenter, and obviously anybody who doesn't know, that's Dean Cundy, was the cinematographer who came up with John Carpenter, and Cundy went on to shoot, Jurassic Park and other big... He worked with Robert Zemeckis a bit too, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he shot...
Did he do Back to the
Forrest
Future?
Gump? I think he shot Forrest Gump. He did do Back to the Future, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, Anyway, so that was that little quick reference. And then, I just want to quickly give a shout out, a thank you to Friedrich Skaug Fadness and to Benjamin Matthew Wright. Thank you guys so much for making this episode possible. And please, everyone out there, sign up for our Patreon, patreon.com/LightTheFuse. We got bonus episodes every week. And I think that's about it. It's just our little mini episode this week, so we hope you enjoyed it. Oh, and I almost forgot to say that this episode was edited by Luke Burson, and the music was by Kevin Blumenfeld. So thank you to those guys.
Follow us on social media at Light the Fuse Pod on Instagram and Twitter for the latest updates from us.
Thanks again for listening, everyone. And before we go, another mission, should you choose to accept it, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember that you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at LightTheFusePod, and email us questions or comments at lightthefusepodcast@gmail.com. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds.